History Month. I just want to introduce myself. If you've already been here a couple of times, you're probably going to hear this again, so I apologize, but bear with me. I'm Misty. I have been with STA since last year. I'm super new. I live in Shakopee. I've lived here since 2016. I have 7 kids. I did say 7. I'm married to my husband, Tim. We have really just kind of been not super connected in the community. So I joined SDA with the idea of being connected and feeling passionately about the murder of George Floyd. It was a good way to get involved with a diverse community. The SDA in Shakopee provides community and personal support to families of color in our area. We have been focused on resources for people of color targeted by hate crimes, but also our other communities in need, especially during COVID-19. COVID-19 has hit people of color really, really hard. So we've had a lot more need in that area. A lot of these events we've decided to do just to highlight issues that affect Black people, especially in Black History Month. We've also done some celebrations. I know Whitley, we celebrated her business. So thank you for that, Whitley. And Rochelle, we celebrated her business as well. But just really also focusing on issues and ways that we can help the Black and Brown communities, especially in Black History Month, and not just then, but all the time. This event was sponsored by Old National Bank and St. Francis. So thank you very much to both groups for being willing to support these events and our organizations. With that said, I have to plug support. We are donation based. We are very small. So please feel free to donate. We love that, and it helps us do other things in the community. I'm going to go ahead and introduce both our speakers. Our first speaker is Kalina Morgan. She's a team lead for the Supportive Partnerships of Anti-Racist Communities initiative in the suburban metro area continuum of care. In addition to this role, she is also a newly elected governing board member for the SMAC, very cool, team lead of the supportive housing program at MHR Incorporated, entrepreneur, author, mother, wife, sister, and friend. Wow, I'm tired. Kalina possesses over 18 years in the area of housing and mental health. Thank you very much for joining us. Our other speaker is Katie Bowe. She's a member of the team for Supportive Partnerships for Anti-Racist Communities initiative. She works for the CAP agency. Love the CAP agency. Thank you, Katie. In the office located in Shakopee, and is a part of the supportive housing team working with individuals who were previously homeless to gain housing stability. Previously, Katie worked with homeless youth in Carver County. Very, very cool. I'm going to let you ladies take it over. Thank you very much for coming this evening and sharing with all of us.
Thank you. You want to go, Katie? I'll go.
You're going to put the PowerPoint up.
I'll do so. Thank you all for having us. I am in the right place, obviously. With that introduction, it's awesome to be here. And I'll share our PowerPoint now. Are you seeing that? You see that?
Yes, just
Yes,
put it in
I see
present
it. Thank you.
into the slideshow.
Oh, sorry, I'm already ahead. All right, so as Misty introduced us, my name is Kalina Morgan. I am the SPARK, Supportive Partnership for Anti-Racist Communities team lead. I am my also team member here, Katie. We've been doing this work since 2019, where we started with C4 Innovations. And this is a statewide initiative, but we are representing SMAC, which is the South Metro Regional Area Continuum of Care, which includes Anoka County, Dakota County, Washington County, Scott, and Carver counties. Our goal in this initiative is to eliminate homeless racial inequities in the SMAC counties. So just to start off, we have some definitions because most of you are probably not in housing or in the homeless world. So we want to give you some definitions of what we will be saying, all of the acronyms. I started to laugh when Misty said all of the acronyms, so bear with us here. SMAC, as I said, is South Metro Area Continuum of Care. And those counties that are included are, as I said, Anoka, Dakota, Washington, Scott, and Carver counties. Spark.
The continuum of care is really like housing focused in this instance. So we're not talking about necessarily healthcare or stuff like this. It's these 5 counties working on homelessness, and they band together to kind of get grants and resources, and then decide where those resources are going to go and how we are going to assess and coordinate homelessness and care for those homeless individuals, or housing and care for those homeless individuals.
And SPARK, as I said, are also is the supportive partnership for anti-racist communities. Again, the initiative began with the consultation of C4 Innovations, which is out of the East Coast. I'm not sure the exact state, but out of the East Coast. And they brought together all of the continuum of cares in the state of Minnesota to work on making sure that we're looking at the work that we do with the racial equity lens. So that work began in 2019 for our team and is continuing on. So that's why we're here. Also, you'll see in some of the slides, we'll say PIT, which is point in time. Each year we have a point in time count of those that are currently homeless and those who are currently sheltered and homeless without shelter, or those that are in programs as well. So the point in time count happens every January. And like I said, it's to count those that are currently homeless during that time. Is a 24-hour period where we have outreach, we have those that are in shelters, those that are other providers out, making sure that we're counting those that may get missed, who are not in the usual shelter, transitional housing places, and just making sure that we have a pretty accurate count of the homeless population during that time. The HMIS, when we say HMIS, we're referring to a homeless management information system. That is what all of the providers in the homeless arena we use to make sure that it's a way of keeping data that is related to each of the individuals that we serve, making sure that those that are homeless that have been assessed, whether they're on waiting lists, whether they're in housing currently, that they're a part of this system so that we're able to track and get data as we'll see later in the presentation. Also, coordinated entry, CE, is the list, I'm sorry, it is the entity that those who are homeless and who are able to, those who are homeless are assessed through coordinated entry, and they are placed on a priority list. So when we have data related to the coordinated entry information, is those that have been counted as homeless and either placed on a priority list or move through a referral to an agency or provider of housing. And BIPOC, Black, Indigenous People of Color. And when we refer to the Handbook of the Streets, we're referring to a manual of area resources. There currently is one in St. Paul and Minneapolis that have resources from housing, education, food, where to apply for emergency assistance or other funds for housing, rental assistance. It includes a number of resources that will support people with getting their needs met. And so when we refer to Handbook of the Streets, we're referring to that type of manual for this area. Would you add anything else, Katie?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. And there are a lot of acronyms. So if at any point in time you're like, I don't know what you're talking about again, raise your hand, because to start off with all these acronyms is tough.
Yes.
And it's one of the biggest barriers to get into the housing world, and one of probably the biggest barriers that homeless individuals face is trying to understand these systems as well.
Absolutely. All right. So this is a graph of the data that we were able to obtain. This information was obtained from the PIT count, that January count of those that are currently experiencing homelessness or on that list of that priority list. And it was obtained from the HMIS system, the Homeless Management Information System. And the trend that we see here, that although the population, the general population is 86% white, 4% Black, and 5% multiracial, and so forth. When it comes to deep poverty, the numbers for African American in particular jump. When it comes to the point of time count, they also excel. Again, in the HMIS numbers, they also increase. And this is for a population that's only 4%. And when we talk about Scott and Carver counties, the numbers or the data that we receive specifically for these counties is reflective of this as well. Other BIPOC communities have been affected, as you see here. The Hispanic community, my cursor keeps disappearing. The Hispanic community also experiences a large increase in the deep poverty area, as well as in the point of time count. But because, again, this is an initiative we're looking at, we had amount of time to look at the disparities. And because of the huge disparity in the Black community, we decided to focus specifically on the Black community. All right. I guess there was some animation. So what this data shows is that African Americans only represent 4% of the general population, as stated, only 14% of those in deep poverty, but represent 30% of those homeless during the point in time count, and 33% of those that are in that HMIS system. And what this shows is that a disproportionate amount of African Americans are in the SMAC area are experiencing homelessness, and it is not due to deep poverty. So that was a major takeaway. One of the other things that we were able to, or one of the other data points we were able to obtain was this of where people are exiting to. And when we say exit, we're referring to those that are leaving that priority list and those that are leaving programs, and where are they exiting to. And so specifically, as we have highlighted here, where we see whites are exiting to places not meant for habitation, emergency shelter. African Americans, only 5% are exiting to places not meant for habitation. 0 are exiting to emergency shelter or safe haven. And how this comes into play, to get on that priority list, you have to be what they call, you have to be homeless. And in order to get into programs that are specific for chronically homeless individuals, you have to be either homeless by living in a place not meant for habitation or living in a shelter. And if, as you see here, the African American population are not going to either the place not meant for habitation or the emergency shelter. So that makes that population less likely to receive that voucher or go to that program that has that voucher to support that family or that individual.
Elena, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
There's a question, and I have the same question. What does it mean that Black homelessness is not related to deep poverty? Can you explain that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What that means is that, I'll go back to that slide, sorry.
Thank you.
Do you want me to grab this one, Kalina?
Sure.
So we're not saying that homelessness isn't related to deep poverty, but deep poverty alone is not a predictor for homelessness.
Yes.
Because what we're finding is between the deep poverty and homelessness for Black individuals, there's this gap of 16%. So those 16% aren't in deep poverty, but are still homeless. And that's also exactly what we look for when we presented some strategies to address this. Is what can we do to target that 16% that's not in deep poverty? They may be in poverty, but there's something besides just missing income that is keeping them in homelessness.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, so she said, what exactly is deep poverty? So yes, but she wants to know what deep poverty is.
I think technically deep poverty is, it's like the 200% of the median income.
Yes.
And so I believe anything under that is considered deep poverty, where like the 200 to 100% is considered poverty. And I'm not positive on those percentages, but I know that's kind of what we look at for percentages at CAP when we're determining if someone is eligible for certain programs.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And thanks, Stephanie, for the questions.
Thank you. Okay. Also, what we are seeing, the trend that we are seeing for the African American population is that they're more likely to go into temporary housing or doubled up. So doubled up is where there's a family, there's more than one family within that unit. And temporary housing can be anything from transitional housing to just a housing situation that's not meant to be permanent. Sorry. Okay, so what we, go back. So what we did as a team, the SMAC Spark team, we held two different, we gathered data from two different places. We gathered the quantitative data of from the HMIS and the point in time count, but we also gathered data by interviewing those with lived experience that are of the BIPOC community within the SMAC community. And so our team held two different listening sessions, and these sessions sought input and information from the BIPOC individuals with lived experience of homelessness. Questions that we focused on were their personal stories with homelessness, how race impacted their experience and the community responses offered, and their experiences with services offered, as well as how they found services. So how they even found out about what was available to them. And what we found, the takeaways from those listening sessions that we held, one was homeless individuals are discovering resources through word of mouth. Agency outreach is not what is bringing homeless clients in. And so some of that feedback that we received was, they heard about where to go by someone else who was in the same situation. We also found that BIPOC individuals who are homeless are judged unfairly than white individuals. There are many situations where they discussed being treated like they were in prostitution or on drugs, assumed that they were. Situations where a gentleman and his family were all homeless, and the option to separate, and that his wife and family would do better if he weren't a part of the family, was given to him, whereas, as he stated, this would not have been an option for a white individual and their family. See, the shelter system is hard to navigate and is problematic. There are many situations that were noted that we put our name on the list as needing a bed for the night, but when we came back, our name had been removed from the list. We were bumped because of someone who was a veteran or someone who was a senior, and we weren't informed before 5, 6 o'clock at night when we needed a place to lay our heads. So at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, we're looking for a place to stay. One gentleman said, and during those times, I go to the transit station, I go, to bathrooms, wherever I can find a place that I can lay my head and that is going to be warm. Many individuals know what would help them exit homelessness, but find the resources available in those areas to be inadequate. So again, one individual was in a shelter, and not even a mile away was the workforce center, but they being from out of state, hadn't been informed of that, and they knew they needed a job, wanted a job, but did not even know how to get to the place that was less than a mile away that could help them obtain that job.
Can I ask a question really quick? In regards to your listening sessions, how are these businesses getting that information out to the homeless so that they can participate in these sessions?
So we had 2 listening sessions, one for youth and one for adults. We sent them to all providers, or we sent flyers to all providers. We asked providers to get them out in their area, all the providers of SMAC, I should say, and get them out in their area, whatever county they were in, and wherever their agencies were. We did have, and like I said, it was only twice, and I believe it was it February of last year, Katie?
That sounds right.
Okay. And so those that showed up was because of the efforts of the providers that got the information out and was able to contact myself or who was on the flyers and get and come. We also provided gift cards for those that were going to be present, and food as well. We tried to get them with food.
But to your point, Heidi, I think if we did this now with COVID, having put such a pressure to do things virtually, we would have a better outcome and a better representation of the different communities. Because ours was held in Washington County. Was she in Washington?
Ramsey County, and because it was a central point.
Yep.
And then we also had one in Dakota County in Apple Valley.
And so like a lot of Carver County residents and Scott County residents didn't have the accessibility to get there. And so I do think that, again, with the development and use of different digital platforms, that we would have been able to have a better response nowadays. But we were doing it before COVID hit.
Yeah, officially.
I appreciate that.
There's another question too, and you guys can save this one for later. I think it's a valid question.
Sure.
Specifically talking about homelessness. I believe the question's from Linda, so thank you for your question, Linda. Her question is, what are some things that you are seeing, both of you are seeing, that are keeping people homeless? Like, is it COVID? Is it, you know, lack of resources clearly, but are you seeing things that are very specific that are keeping people in homelessness?
Yeah,
You want to
and
take this,
I
Katie?
will,
Mhm.
yeah, I'll definitely address this later in the presentation. And so if we can wait until then, and then if there's further questions about it, definitely push further and ask for more details.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, not a problem. So when we looked at our data, one of the goals of this program, of this initiative is to come up with recommendations to address the racial disparities, the inequities within our communities. And so these are the 3 strategies that we developed. Again, looking at those individuals who are not in deep poverty, but are still falling into homelessness. So again, I talk about it being that 16%. So what is going on with those? How can we address the homelessness within those individuals and address homelessness across the board? But specifically, what do we need to do to help those people better? And so one of the first things was making sure that the connection to services is improved, especially having a housing navigator to locate and maintain stable housing. So one thing we talked about was that handbook of the streets. Minneapolis is notorious for having the handbook of the streets. And it is a powerful tool that even case managers use in Minneapolis to find and point to resources within their community. Again, it has food resources, it has education, you know, free clinics, where can you go get HIV testing, STD testing, all of those items. And there is really no centralized listing in any of the counties for resources for homeless individuals. And so to not only develop that for, you know, Scott County, but to make sure that's being developed across the board for all of the counties that SMAC is serving. We also want to look for funding and apply for funding to create a housing navigator to serve BIPOC individuals. This person would be BIPOC. This person would assist in working with barriers. So how can a client talk to a landlord about barriers such as a criminal history, an eviction history, to show that they are ready to rent and they should be rented to, and they have a right to be rented to, but kind of making that case about why I might not fit the perfect criteria, but I'm still a good candidate for this apartment or for this housing. And these would be people that are fairly ready for housing. They have, you know, they have an income that can pay for the housing that they're looking for. So working with them on budgeting and things like that as well. But again, some of these individuals are having a hard time just getting into housing. And so what can we do to assist them in getting into housing? And so we came up with the idea of the housing navigator. You go to the next
Sorry,
slide.
lost my cursor.
Oh, that's okay. And another.
Did I go 3? Just
Yep.
a minute.
All right, and then develop a short-term intensive case management program. So those people that we may have helped get into housing, maybe they just need a little bit of case management, some guidance about how to maintain that housing. What choices do they need to make? How can they work within the system to keep that housing? And what other supports do they need? Do they need mental health supports? Do they need childcare supports? You know, what can those things look like? And also people who may just be, they're at risk of losing their housing. They're starting to fall behind on rent. The landlord may be starting to have complaints about them being a tenant. So having someone to kind of step in and help them ensure that that housing is not lost, because we all know, and you know, I should just say it, but finding housing after you've lost it is so much more difficult than maintaining housing. It is more costly, it is more timely, it is all of those things. And so this would really be client-driven services. So they're going to dictate what they want to work on, what supports they might need. And it would be really small caseloads to provide those services and those referrals, and also could potentially be some partial rent assistance. You know, maybe they had a drop in hours. And so giving them a few months to kind of either look for a second job or work out something with their employer to bump those hours back up, was another intervention that we came up with. And then a big one is involving clients in service delivery, policy creation, and decision making. So one of the biggest things that I have is that oftentimes homeless clients are in crisis, and we are expecting those clients in crisis to come to the agency to get help. And how is that, like, almost no other service are you expecting someone in crisis to find a way to you and then talk calmly with you? And so figuring out different ways that we can go to that client in crisis. And, there's no perfect solution to homelessness. Scott County does not have a brick and mortar shelter. We have hotel vouchers that we use to put up people for shelter. But because of some of the caveats of that funding, it's a really small program. And that's the same with Carver County. It's a really small hotel shelter program that we have. And so, what can we do to help those people in crisis, even though we may not be able to get them into shelter as well? Ensure equitable and best practices are supported through policy. There's a lot of great agencies and organizations that are doing great work on equity, but if it's not in policy, there's nothing that ensures that it's happening. So making sure that the policies of SMAC at the governing board and different agencies reflect that. And then having people with lived experience more involved with the decision making. We have a governing board and they kind of dictate what way SMAC goes. And so making sure that the governing board really is reflective of the people in the SMAC region, which it hasn't been, but there is a push. And there have been new elections such as Kalina to the new board that are pushing it in the right direction, are pushing it into better representing the communities that we serve. And so we kind of think about, what is success measured by? And one of those things is building capacity. Not only building agency capacity, but also building individual capacity. Go to the next one. Increase BIPOC leadership. That is within agencies and at the governing level. And make sure BIPOC feel welcomed and access services at the same level. So all too often, as a BIPOC individual, you come into an agency and it is a white person greeting you. And to immediately have that as the first image is very off-putting to a lot of people. People who have dealt with racism their entire life, and then you're going and asking for help and you have to tell a white individual what you need help with. That's really disparaging, in my opinion. It doesn't open up those lines of communication well at all. So that's one thing that we would like to see agencies push for.
Yes, and I'd add to this, Katie, that as our listening session, as individuals indicated that when they came into places that they were, they felt judged, like, oh, you have a job, but you can't keep a house, or, why are you here? Or you're really trying to get over the system. So making sure that when individuals enter places, agencies, that they experience a welcoming environment, as opposed to one that's judging and scrutinizing why they need their help. Also, that service and that access to that service is equal to that of any other population, but that general population. If you're experiencing homelessness at 30%, then you should be able to access that service at that level, hopefully lessening to the general population level, but at that point you should be accessing it equally.
And one thing that we would really like to see is that, obviously we don't want anyone to be homeless. That is the ultimate goal, of course. But if there is homelessness, to have it correlated to the percentage of population. Because then again, we're seeing equitable outcomes. It's not necessarily just, but it at least is representative of the population. And so again, the goal is to eliminate the disparities within the 5 SMAC counties. All right. So we made some recommendations, and some of these have already happened and some of these we are working on. And one was to make SMAC a permanent thing. And the board has agreed, and that we are doing that and continuing our work. And another big thing is with the recommendations that we are making, we need to have funding. And so using the current funding that we have to figure out ways that we can address these inequities and fund these programs or fund these recommendations. And then we still will need to find some flexible funding sources. So a lot of times the money that housing providers get is very specific, and there's very certain criteria of how you can spend it. So getting some grants that are more open-ended, and the agency can dictate, specifically SMAC can dictate how an agency is using some of these funds. And then utilize heading home meetings to build handbook of the streets. Each county, and Scott and Carver actually have theirs together, but it's called Heading Home. And so it looks at homelessness, it looks at response, it does a lot of data stuff. It is very heavy on the acronyms and stuff. And for me, it took a while to get used to it. But once you do, you follow along well. And so utilizing those meetings to build the handbook of the streets that we talked about. If anyone is interested in getting involved in the Heading Home meetings, they are definitely looking for people with lived experience. But I think they would take even just people in the community who understand what BIPOC individuals are experiencing on a daily basis. So if you have, if you would like to get involved, just let us know. And also, if you are interested in being a Spark member, so learning all this terminology and helping us out, we would be thrilled to have additional people.
Absolutely.
And then strengthen buy-in from the governing board. The governing board has made progress, but so far we have seen a lot of good intention, but not necessarily a lot of action. And so that's what we really want to kind of push on the governing board, is to see the action behind those intentions. And then utilize the Directors Council. The Directors Council is a group of individuals with lived experience. So they have all been homeless at some point in their life, and many of them are BIPOC individuals. And they are making recommendations across the board to influence the homeless systems within the 5 counties that SMAC serves.
Yes.
And now, kind of your impact. What can you do? So we've talked about this at the SMAC level, but it's Shakopee Diversity Alliance. What can you do within Shakopee? What can you do within Scott County to really kind of make an impact? And one of the biggest things is advocating. We need good, strong advocates out there who are talking to people, are talking to landlords, and doing what they can to kind of further this conversation. And one of the biggest things is rental policies. There are a lot of places that require 2 to 3 times the income of rent to be able to get accepted. That's a lot of income. When we're talking that most 1-bedroom apartments in Shakopee are renting between $900 and $1,000, they're expecting you to have a monthly income of $3,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of income. And so, you know, talking about, is there wiggle room within that? Is there something where maybe the family can show a budget about how they can afford to pay that rent? Another thing is, and Minneapolis has worked on this, but not being able to deny an application simply because of criminal history or simply because someone has an eviction. You need to look at the multifaceted, and if there's multiple of these things, that would be grounds for denial. Another thing that many of the CAP clients face, and I think Kalina, you can speak to this as well, is that someone gets on a housing program, they only need to pay 30% of their income towards rent. So it would be affordable, but then finding a place that will accept that grant, accept that voucher is extraordinarily difficult.
Yes. And as some people on our team call it, it's like getting a golden ticket, but you can't use it anywhere. Because there are a lot of landlords who have made it almost impossible to use that voucher, even if you have an impeccable rental history and your background is clear of any of criminal activity. You have this voucher, and say the maximum that your voucher goes up to is $1,054. You have landlords that have put their rent at $1,075.
And there's a lot of landlords within Shakopee that flat out will not take it. And some of this is they've had bad experiences with renters that have come with these vouchers. And, you know, it's hard. On one hand, during COVID, we've probably have some more landlords join being willing to take them because it's guaranteed rent. Even if they don't have income, like the CAP agency will pay their full rent. And so the landlord knows that they're going to get rent. But they always have, again, this connotation that there's going to be drugs involved. There's going to be people in and out, there's going to be violence, they're going to trash the apartment. And so we're really up a lot of times against these preconceived notions, but also sometimes the experience that has happened. And so that's a hard thing. Another big one that has become apparent in my job is having some apartment standards. The biggest thing is that mold. Scott County does not have a mold ordinance. So that means that the apartments can say that we didn't cause that water damage, we didn't cause that mold, we don't have to fix it. And there's no legal ramifications for that. And this to me just continues that disparity and inequity that we're talking about, because oftentimes BIPOC, specifically Black individuals, are facing health disparities in addition to housing disparities. So when you can finally afford a place and get into a place because they see you're Black and they automatically have connotations with that. So you get into a place and then that health disparity is continued because your children are exposed to mold, you're exposed to mold. And the impact that it has on learning and health. You're out of school many days if your kids are exposed, you know, oftentimes to mold. And so having some basic apartment standards, some living standards. And I believe the Shakopee City Council has had some initial conversations on this, but I have not heard any further updates about that. But again, ensuring that people are moving into hospitable living conditions. And that's, you know, it's good policy for everyone. Support building projects. Saracen Flats opened recently. What was it, about a year ago, 9 months ago. And that's considered to be a workforce property. And the rents there are affordable considering, but again, a lot of people are just barely squeaking by, and still a $900 per month rent for a 1-bedroom is not affordable for everyone. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still have these support these building projects. And a lot of times we get this feedback as housing providers that, well, we know that low income housing is needed, but I don't want it in my backyard.
Right.
And so again, having that conversation, kind of pushing back on people on that ideology. And then support the housing first principle and housing as a right. If you're not familiar with housing first, what that states is that someone should get housing first. Like, it's as simple as that. There are a lot of people who are like, well, they're not ready for housing. They have a chemical dependency issue. And it's saying, that's okay. We are going to house you, and then we can focus on getting you referrals and getting you the resources that you need. And it's about having that stability. It's really hard to get into treatment. It's really hard to get insurance. It's really hard to get, food support when you don't have an address to send anything to. And so, in changing this kind of perception that housing is a commodity, and the Alliance, and I will show a graphic, but the Alliance from Minneapolis and St. Paul has done great work with this about housing shouldn't be a commodity. It should be a human right. And so again, changing that conversation of, well, you should be doing this, this, or this to get housing. Why? Why shouldn't every single child have proper housing when they are going to school? And a lot of times people are more sympathetic when you bring up kids, but everyone should have a safe place to lay their head at night.
Yes. And just to piggyback on what you were saying, Katie, we have a permanent supportive housing program at MHR. And one of the great success stories that just happened in December is that an individual was able to first came in as homeless and we received them through that coordinated entry referral. And we were able to house him during housing. While once he's housed, we were able to help him with getting connected with a provider, a medical provider, getting connected with psychiatry if he needed that. But ultimately, what just happened was that he was able to, he came into some money from his father, and he was able to buy a condo. So his stability during the time that he was housed, he was given the opportunity to stabilize. He was able to get his health, taken care of. He was able to get his mental health taken care of, and able to move to the place of buying his own condo. So that was great to see. That just happened in December. So these opportunities afford people that ability when we focus on housing first.
Go ahead, Heidi. You were going to say something. Nope. Okay. So, and this is just, again, to kind of reflect back on some of the areas of advocacy. This includes the SMAC region plus Ramsey and Hennepin. And this is from State of the State's Housing report from 2019. And this kind of just looks at cost burden renters and homeowners. And I think the one thing for me is that if you look at the top corner, the right corner, it shows that there are 72,000 individuals in these areas that can't find affordable housing. And I think one is too many. And it also talks about how there's cost burden. And in my opinion, because you have Ramsey and Hennepin, specifically Hennepin, it's easier to find lower income housing. Yes, the cost of living might be more, but I would say that probably this cost burden and lack of affordable housing is even more severe in Shakopee and Scott County.
What you have in Hennepin and Ramsey counties are more landlords willing to rent at a lower rate. We don't see that so much in the areas in Shakopee or in Scott and Carver counties, in the SMAC area in general, the suburban areas.
And then this is the graphic that I talked about from the Alliance. Again, it's a consortium of different nonprofits that work together to look at equity, and housing is just one of those areas that they look at. And you will see under access, those are kind of the key areas that I discussed as needing some advocacy around. You know, the ability to choose where you live. If you have a voucher, whether it's a Section 8 voucher or a different HUD voucher, your access is extremely limited in Shakopee. There are only a handful of landlords that will work with us, and those units are in high demand because they tend to be lower income, lower rent. Paying an amount that is truly affordable.
Yes.
Most housing experts will tell you that you should not be paying more than 30% of your income towards rent. And so finding places like that when you are earning minimum wage is almost impossible in the Shakopee Scott County area. Living in a space that is large enough for your household. We have many individuals who are living 5 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. It goes against city code, but again, you're going to do what you can do to make it work. If all you can afford is a 1-bedroom apartment, you're going to get that 1 bedroom and hope for the best. And then reasonable screening criteria and security deposits and make housing attainable. You know, the screening criteria, again, in Minneapolis, they have pushed really hard to get the screening criteria more accessible, so that you can't just be denied just for a criminal background or just for this. It has to be a multifaceted reason for denial. And then another big thing that they point out is that access needs to be regardless of immigration status. And that is extraordinarily difficult to find in Shakopee. Is places that don't require a social security number or something like that. So, and then it just talks about, you know, stability, the practices within that the landlord has, how evictions are handled, those types of things, and community. And again, their big push is that to take it from a commodity, so to take it from something where it's practically like a bidding process. It is a business, and to make it into a community thing that is a right. So. And then last but not least, these are local organizations that I know of. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these agencies primarily provide services for homeless individuals or individuals at risk of becoming homeless. Loaves and Fishes is a great organization. They do meals Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. There's the opportunity to donate to help them serve. Right now, it's not a communal dining area. They're doing kind of like box lunches and bringing them out to people to go. Shakopee Community Alliance, or SCA, is another great organization. They will help Shakopee and Scott County with different needs, such as like coats they have. They will help with diapers, things like that. And the housing department at CAP pairs really well with them. If we have an influx of donations, we will bring some over there, and vice versa. They also have a partnership with Kotex right now. So they have period supplies, which not every organization has, you know, feminine products to use or to give out. Another one that my coworker said is Saber Nation Station. So it is, it helps with some basic needs, basic supplies. And I believe it's at the high school and one of the middle schools right now. And then Shakopee Schools, specifically Dakota, has a lot of teens that are dealing with homelessness. Some of them are actually homeless themselves. When I was at the shelter in Carver County, I worked with a few individuals from there. One was sleeping, would lock himself in the grocery store restroom at night to have a place to sleep, because he was homeless until he came to our shelter. Of course, I'm with CAP. I have to mention CAP. You may hear CAP doesn't do anything, but we are very limited in our funding and how we can spend that funding. But we always try and do the best we can to help. And then Fish, if you haven't heard of Fish, Fish is another awesome network that does amazing things. They help us as a CAP worker all the time. And so that's another way to get involved in specifically Shakopee and Scott County communities.
We have a housing question for either one of you. This is from Holly. Thanks for the question, Holly. She asked, does Shakopee not offer Section 8 or Section 42 subsidized housing, or are you talking about other forms of affordable housing?
So there are other forms. There are Section 8 vouchers through the CDA. And so as we know, though, those tend to be very few and far between. The wait lists tend to be super long. They're actually closing the Section 8 wait list. It was open for about a week and they're closing it tonight at midnight. And that's just to apply to be on the wait list. And last I knew, which there were still 2 more days, there were 700 applications for 500 spots that they were going to put on the wait list. And that's, again, you're still potentially waiting years on that wait list to get a voucher even. And Section 42, we definitely have Section 42. I do not think that we have nearly enough.
Katie, will you explain Section 42?
Yeah, so Section 42 is basically the building company works with the federal government and they agree to have a set number of units that are lower priced than even they're lower priced. And so they tend to be looked at as affordable housing, very affordable housing. Again, there's oftentimes a wait list and it's very, very difficult to get into Section 42. The programs that, or the vouchers that I also have talked about is we have at the CAP agency, we have HUD vouchers. And so talking like Kalina said about permanent supportive housing, and we also have what's called rapid rehousing. And so those are very specific programs that do the 30% of income. And then there's also this wacky program that has so many nuances and so many craziness that's called housing support. And that one is not done by the federal government, but that one is done by the Minnesota government. But that one is it's not straightforward like some of the other programs.
Yes. And to kind of distinguish between them, those that are HUD funded are usually those that you are referred to through the coordinated entry process or through the SMAC continuum of care in your area. Those that are wacky, the housing supports, that's a state or a county funded program where housing is identified and they have to be willing to accept this type of funding, and it's really based on that person's income and need. And for those that are very low income and only get GA, it's great. For those that have Social Security, there's a lot of pushback because they have a limited amount of income that they actually receive, like about $100 or so that they actually get themselves that does not go toward their rent. So there's pluses and minuses to that, but they're out there. So we can tell you places to go as far as to get into those different housing resources.
And one thing that we see often is to be on coordinated entry and get a referral to these programs where you pay 30% of your income, you have to be homeless. So that means if you are in housing, you have to lose your housing to be eligible to be on this list. And there are some sources of funding that are called prevention, but that funding is few and far between. And it is very, very difficult to get it. And oftentimes, like, they recently changed what you have to have to be able to get prevention money. And one of those is an eviction notice. So again, You now are at the point where you're getting evicted for non-payment typically, and the amount of money that is required to get you back into good standing is much larger than if you were a month behind, and we could help you with prevention money. And that's something that the state government decided, for those dollars. That's something that we just have to play nice with.
Mhm. Where'd you go? So, who plays a role in achieving success? And it's you do. So we all do. Besides those that are already housing providers, the continuum, the governing board, those that are working already on ending homelessness are those that are at the county level. They're in local government. They're at the state level at times, at DHS representatives. But generally it's housing providers that are receiving those funds or funding, and we're trying to determine how to best utilize those funds that are becoming available, program specific expectations or whatnot. We also, as a Spark, with looking at these efforts to end homelessness through a racial equity lens, we need that of the public. We need that of local agencies. Even in some areas like Anoka County, they've been using law enforcement to go out to camps, and they have days where there's no badge, nothing. Here, come get your resources. Come, find out what's available to you. So faith communities, there are resources there, like as we talked about, Loaves and Fishes and other, churches, especially my experience in Dakota County. There are a number of churches that wrap around the shelter there, Dakota Woodlands, and provide the food there, the bedding there. So there's opportunities to get involved that way. Specifically for the Spark team, as Katie mentioned earlier, we are still looking for team members. Initially, when we started this work and through 2020, we had 5 people that have been working to make sure that we're looking at things with a racial equity lens. And we've done some great work, but we could use some additional hands and feet, so to speak, in your area. So that's available as well. The Directors Council is made up of people with lived experience. If you have that lived experience, that's also an option. Definitely wanting to make change within your local area. So as she mentioned earlier, some of the things she mentioned about residential, the landlords and policies with apartments and, those type of things that you can advocate for and make changes for on the local area, as well as, making sure that we're talking to the city council and lawmakers for your area, and in terms of, hey, what are we doing about folks that we see, that are homeless? And if we don't see them, what we know they're there, what are we doing about this population? How are we helping? And in particular, what are we doing for the BIPOC community of those that are homeless? Getting involved in those agencies that provide that support, whether you work for them currently or whether they are, I'll stop sharing. Whether they are, you have some access to those agencies, and, getting on boards or, having influence there, that's very important as well. Just making, I think of it, probably shouldn't think of it this way, but I think of it oftentimes as like a chess game where you're able to maneuver based on your ability, your power, you're able to maneuver, and with you, you're bringing forth those things that are important to you. And so if you're able to be in places where these individuals' voices are not, making sure that we're representing and giving voice to their cause, their situation, and sometimes making folks aware that are not always aware, that is helpful. Katie, would you add anything?
No, any more questions?
Yeah.
You guys talked a little bit about law enforcement, and just maybe speak to that perspective, because you're going to have BIPOC people who also have this fear of law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And we all know the George Floyd trial is coming up very soon. So having law enforcement approach this community, how can that happen safely and still have these people feel comfortable getting the services they need to not be homeless?
Yeah.
I also think in Shakopee, it's a very unique situation as well, because of the Latinx community that we have, and the large population of undocumented individuals that Shakopee has. And so it's one of those things where you have to take it slow, and you have to find that right officer to start that bridge.
Right.
Because not every officer is equipped to start building those relationships. But if you can build trust, it goes multiple ways in improving safety, but also the feeling of community and the feeling of being respected and involved.
Absolutely. Where we've seen it is in Anoka, as I mentioned earlier. Anoka County is kind of special in that they don't have a lot of the resources that we have in other counties. Case management resources, mental health resources, they're just like not there. And so officers in that area began to see, the population and, tent communities, and wanted to do something, but not in a penalizing way. So that's what worked for that particular area. Doesn't mean that it's going to work for other areas. Blaine is very different than Shakopee or West St. Paul. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have just a question. For people, you had mentioned that you need more volunteers. So for people who are interested in volunteering, I know you have your donate to local agencies, your impact piece, but would they call that same number for the CAP agency?
I can, if I put in the Q&A, my email address, is that helpful? Is that good?
Yes, as long, so we can see that. Is it okay with you that we share that email address and post our video? Wonderful.
Yep.
Mine as well.
And just a side note with the donations, if you're considering donating items, make sure you contact the agency ahead of time to make sure they're needed. It was wonderful, but we had gotten so many coats, and we got a call from a restaurant that had done a coat drive. And due to the limited amount of storage space we have, we couldn't accept them. We did know of another organization that needed them, and were able to make that connection. But just make sure before you show up with bags of coats or anything like that, that you call and make sure, because, like the SDA also has coats, but they are very limited on their space as well. So sorry, just a little complaint side note thing. We love getting donations, but there's only so much. We have like a little, probably about the size of a cube, to store everything in that we have. So plates and stuff like that, anything that we're going to help someone who's coming out of homelessness, we have a tiny space. So we really have to be selective in what we take in.
I see a question in the Q&A, but I also want to speak to the donations. What you mentioned earlier, Katie, about feminine hygiene products, that is crucial. That's one of the areas that people just haven't thought of, but it's so needed for not only those that are within programs, but also the homeless population, and to the how an individual would have to come to ask you for a gift card or feminine products and be denied, how degrading that could feel. And that's happened. Well, I would not deny her, but that has happened with me. And yeah, I made a way to make sure that she got a gift card, but that I've experienced that directly. But that is one of those areas that, oh, we didn't think about that because we're thinking about housing. But when you think about what an individual really needs when they're homeless, when they don't have the money to provide these essential things, that's a huge one.
Yep,
So if
baby
you can
wipes.
donate those.
Yep,
yes.
baby wipes and wipes, because homeless individuals don't always have the opportunity to take a shower. And so they will clean up with baby wipes on a regular to try and make sure that they are not smelling or looking like they are homeless. So that's another one of those items that you just don't think about.
Right.
You guys have a question in your Q&A. I don't know if you can see it. It says, if you know, would you share the status of the transition housing project that was to be built at what was the KC home? I didn't know about this.
Are you familiar with that, Katie? I am not.
No, and that was in Shakopee. I don't know the KC Hall.
Gina, if you want to unmute yourself, Heidi can unmute you and you can answer live if you're comfortable with that. And maybe give a little more detail on the question.
Hi. Yeah, I live near the KC Hall, and I know there were folks in our neighborhood that were concerned about it. However, I think it's a really important program, to help people transition into housing when they've got other kinds of situations going on. So there's a church, it used to be Brookwood. I can't remember what it's called. When they were Brookwood, they were in the West Junior High. Their name is something else now, but the KC Hall on the corner of 4th and Sarrazin, across from My Pillow, kind of in that vicinity over there. That property was up for sale a long time. It looks like now when I drive by there, it looks like the church is operational, but there's still a for sale sign up on the property. They got approval for a planned unit development in order to be able to do the like, it kind of looked like an apartment complex when I reviewed the site plan. But in June of 2020, the city council approved it. But I don't know what the status is, and the fact that they haven't broken ground or anything, I kind of wondered whether they ran into some challenges or something. So I just wanted to know if anybody knew anything about that.
Gina, if you can see it, there's an article posted in the chat that you can get a look at the information for that too, if you can see the chat. And you guys go ahead and answer that question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I haven't heard of that, but oftentimes by the time I hear about it, they would be looking for a housing provider. So they would have designated units for formerly homeless individuals. And that's typically when I would know about it or hear about it. So my guess is that they may have run into some problems. If the council had already approved it, I just wonder if COVID stuff had sent it, pushed things back. But I haven't heard. Yeah, and I haven't heard about anything specific to that. I know a lot of times the CDA is more involved in that initial stuff. But again, so I just don't have any specific details for you.
Thank you.
I would say that and there is information on it here. They're calling it Prairie Point, but I would definitely say that in my experience, when I think someone alluded to it earlier, when opportunities for housing for affordable housing come into neighborhoods, there often is pushback. So if you can get in touch with, I think it's Beacon Interfaith, and be at the meetings, and or that individual whose house it's by, tell them, be at the meetings and show support. That support goes a long way. Your voice could change the minds of others and say, oh, well, maybe this would be a good thing. And they would be more willing to entertain that idea.
There's a response to the question too. It says they're just working on their capital campaign and securing future funding to build it. So it's still on track. So that's, we're just going to give a few more minutes for questions. And then ladies, I just want to tell you, thank you, tell the participants, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. There's so much information here. And if you could share the information about organizations that people can volunteer for, we talked about Heading Home and the Spark community, we will share that with our thank you. And hopefully people, if you feel inclined, please volunteer. And again,
Yeah, it doesn't look like I can only type a response to the questions. So feel free, though, you guys have my email, feel free to share that with, whatever, however, whatever.
Yeah, and I can share with you the contacts for the Heading Home meetings. And Katie, you are in the Heading Home meetings. Never mind, Katie can do that.
Yeah, yep, I can funnel any of those inquiries to the Heading Home people.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. This was a great opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to present what we found and, what are some concerns and what are our recommendations. So thank you all for allowing us to do that and giving us that time.
Yes, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Very much, ladies. Thanks to my team, everybody. If you can see them, they are wonderful. Thank you to the speakers, and we will be back soon with more events. And ladies, you'll probably be back to share in the future. So thank you for joining us. That's what means you just have to come back.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.